So today we're going to dive into an altcoin analysis, one you recognize, one we've covered here on the network quite a bit, and that is Solana. Take a deeper dive in understanding what's happening with a token that at one point was absolutely on fire and has kind of come back down to earth. This could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. Let's find out. My name is Paul Barrow. Welcome back in to TechPath. Today we're going to look at Solana and kind of some of the things that they have been addressing but also facing. And if we'll also take a look at the sentiment analysis so you guys kind of get a history on Solana. And I've backtracked through almost 2 months of sentiment to kind of give you guys a little bit of an understanding of where that's going. This first story right here, of course, is can attacks on OpenSea backfire on Ethereum and benefit Solana? This is one of the things, if you hadn't had a chance to check out the OpenSea issue, attacks on OpenSea occurs about 1.5 million, I think, in the sense of what, and we continue to see these kind of things with OpenSea, is not as secure of a place for NFTs. And I'm still kind of curious as to what it is about a stolen NFT that people are interested in. I'm not quite getting where that might go. But the advantage here would be if Ethereum and OpenSea continue to see these kind of challenges, could an alternative, especially an alternative token like Solana, could it be the one that gets the benefit from it? If you look at the article, it says, according to CEO Devin Finzer, affected users ended up signing a malicious payload from the attacker. This is how it happened, ended up losing the NFTs. Furthermore, it's been 4 hours since the attack was last active. OpenSea has continued to their investigation and explicitly stated that the attack was no way originated in OpenSea and none of the OpenSea services were responsible in any way. So that in itself, I think, is just to the point that we're continuing to see problems within OpenSea. And of course, this will open up an opportunity, I think, for some of the other NFT platforms and marketplaces, and Solana being one of those that could really kind of break loose. And I think that is the point that a lot of people are trying to make. If you look back here, it says, onto Solana, the above mentioned instances could result in NFT developers and traders moving to Solana, which is as the second biggest NFT marketplace, notably Magic Eden, Solana Art, SolSea, and then of course Alpha combined sold over 3.3 million NFTs in just the last 20 days. So a lot of movement over there, and I think many creators may start to take a serious look at this. Now, granted, we still have seen nothing but upward trends for OpenSea, both on volume, but also on the number of projects that they're releasing on OpenSea. So Ethereum has a big position here, but Solana could take a little bit of froth off the top. And I think that would be enough to continue to grow these marketplaces for NFTs on Solana. And because of that, I think this is a potential opportunity for them. Also, if you look at another scenario right here, this is one that I think is a little bit, it's something you have to pay attention to, because as you start to look at projects like Solana, what you're looking for are those small wins that can eventually become a snowball style effect. Solana leads the recovery during the amid this crypto crash, and it's been one of those projects that has been, I wouldn't necessarily call it a recovery in terms of where Solana's price point has been, and I'll show you that in the chart. But when you look at what they're trying to do and where they have been in comparison to some of the other altcoins who have had some struggles, Solana actually is in a very interesting spot. If you look back here, it says, despite backtracking to 94.35 at the time of writing, Solana is still one of the top gainers of the day. They were up 5.5% in the last 24. This was over the last bit. The market cap of 30 billion. Solana is currently the 8th largest crypto asset according to CoinGecko, and its closest competitor is still Cardano, which I think is one of those projects that continues to surface. We just had some data on Cardano. Sentiment is up again on Cardano. So this is going to be an interesting scenario for Cardano. Could we see Cardano actually maybe position in with Solana again? This is going to be a little bit of a foot race, I think, over the next few months as we start to see a little of this kind of price action move around between some of these top altcoins. Latest price action may have been spurred on by moves from Solana's foundation, a Swiss-based nonprofit organization behind the network's development to arrange a series of in-person events across the globe aimed at supporting the developer ecosystem. This is another thing that we've talked about before. It's called the Hacker House. It's a world tour of physical events, which will be happening in the coming weeks. And this is going to be Moscow, Prague, Berlin and New York, as well as Brazil's area, and then Nassau there in the Bahamas. So that's great. I think this is a factor that you have to look into when you think about the explosion of where some of these projects are going to need to roll out to, especially with Solana. Reason being is they're going to need a lot of developer architecture in place to be able to, one, get out of beta mode, and two, be able to really start to execute on a lot of the promises, whether you look at SolPay, whether you look at NFT platforms and metrics within that. All the projects that need to come to reality are going to need a treasure trove of potential developers. And that's kind of been the scenario with a lot of these leading projects, is the fight for developer talent. This is no different than Silicon Valley in the 90s. It's the same kind of scenario. Everybody's fighting for that talent, and they're trying to get there because of the time is ticking kind of scenario, where you have a lot of projects that are either one, in the downturn, what we may see right now being the crypto winter. Is it? We'll be finding out very quickly, I think, with a lot of these projects. If we continue to see a slide over the next few weeks, I think I would even look at that as being a potential to say this could be the bear market. So that's something to consider, how these developers are, essentially hooking up with these projects, and with what they're doing with this world tour on Hacker House could be a good thing for Solana. This was kind of interesting too, right here. I know this is kind of a one-off scenario, but Wise Barbecue Truck, Wise Barbecue, giving them a big plug here, proud to be the first food truck on the planet to accept SolPay. And I want you to watch this video because this is a pretty cool, let me back it up just a little bit. There we go, that's the loop. So there you can kind of see the transaction right there happening. Look how fast this is. Pretty quick, and one. There it is, boom. So you've got payment almost as quick. Now this is one food truck. Imagine if you had thousands of restaurants who have large transaction queues, all those kind of things starting to play into this. SolPay will need an infrastructure to be able to handle that. But the fact that you've got this in place and the ability for a small vendor like Wise Barbecue to be able to actually implement this, because remember, it kind of has almost an SDK, a software developers kit approach to getting SolPay on your platform, whether it's a POS system or within this particular case, they're doing a web tool. So I think when I see that starting to scale up and we see more and more projects roll out with this, meaning more restaurants or other retail facilities that would be able to take SolPay, now you got something, especially with transaction speeds like that. I think that is a big factor. Another thing was some data coming over from Santiment. Now, what they're saying here is development activity still shows Solana as being the fastest innovative coin compared to Cardano, Polkadot, and close behind you've got others. And I was looking at some of the data that they're comparing to, because you look at development activity is going to be any kind of upgrades, achievements, scenarios where maybe there's been a rollout or a partnership. Those kind of scenarios, I think, are good measurements. And in some cases, these types of projects will initiate sentiment movement in the marketplace. And usually sentiment movement will start to affect retail investors and then institutional investors. And when you have those kind of things, that's when you get price action. So even though we've seen a lot coming in terms of development activity, I don't know necessarily, because if you look at the list right here, kind of look at the drop, or I should say the little step up right here of Cardano, and this is back here in January when Cardano was really getting a lot of traction and has pretty much stabilized right there. Polkadot, of course, dipping a little bit in January. ETH still very flat, and then Chainlink right there, a little bit of an uptrend. But Solana taking a very solid move all the way through, really since December, when, if you look back all the way into November, you have this huge move, and then December, a little bit of a continued growth. And again, this goes back to the headlines that Solana's been able to get. I think a lot of people are looking at Solana as the alternative for where this potentially can go in a lot of different ecosystems. And I think that is going to be either the thing that makes Solana the token that we think it can be, the project that we think it can be, or it will be a potentially nail in its coffin because of lack of being able to execute. Those are the two splinters that occur on any kind of new development project. You're either going to be the hero or you're going to be the heel, depending on how you roll out and actually get it going. If you look at what they're doing in the music side of things, crypto music app Audius bridges audio token from Ethereum to Solana. This is another big factor right here. And we talked to the Audius team about this earlier. Make sure and check out the video. We'll just search Audius. You'll be able to find it on our channel. It was a very good information, I think, download from Audius and being able to understand what they are trying to do for them to be able to move into Solana. And they have been over the past year. That is a pretty big deal because of the fact that I think that Audius is one of those projects that is a little bit of a hidden gem. And I think it's still very early for them because you've got to be able to roll out, in essence, to kind of create attachment to the creator community and especially into the music industry itself. So I think a lot of that still is yet to come. So if they are able to do it in a way that it can really become efficient with Solana, that could be one of the jewels in the crown for Solana if Audius is successful. So we're going to be watching that one very closely. Before we wrap this up and getting into a little bit more about where Solana can go, I want to thank our partner, and that is iTrust Capital. If you are looking to try to get into a crypto IRA, one of the things that I talk about here all the time is looking at long-term plays on investment. And this is one of those scenarios where you can do it with a lot of different projects. So it's no longer just a handful of tokens with iTrust. You'll be able to go in and really treat this like a mini exchange. You have up till April 15th to actually do your IRA, and that's for last year. So you can still take advantage of it from a tax position this year, which is pretty cool. Lots of things they've got going, and I think the big advantages is that you, of course, can do your own self-directed trades inside there. You still get the tax advantages, still 24/7 on the investments, and it's a 1% trade cost, so fairly low. I think that is one of those things when you look at trading inside an IRA, because remember, IRA being a long-term investment, and I think if you're under the age of 40 and you don't have an IRA, or you do have an IRA, maybe this is an opportunity for to engage in another one. Anyway, check out our link below. You'll get $100 of Bitcoin when you use our link in your account and you sign up. So join over there. You'll like it. It's one of those products I use, and we'll kind of get to it because I think the other aspect of Solana is getting a baseline for what's happening in the entire industry. If you look at this article, FTX's US president says Bitcoin will steadily lose market share to Ethereum and Solana and other major altcoins. I think there's a handful of them in there that really can kind of play on. But he goes on to say right here, which I thought was interesting, and this was an interview on CNBC, basically saying altcoins like Ethereum and Solana will eventually get into Bitcoin's share. And we've seen this over time where Bitcoin's dominance starts to drop off just a little bit. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of good projects, especially in the top 25 altcoins, that have continued to stay fairly relevant and also fairly consistent. Even Solana to a certain extent. And you have to think about where Solana was 6 months ago, double the rate of where it is right now, trading at about $160. So this is one of those buying times that a lot of people are looking at. Is this potentially the time in which you'd be able to jump into a project like Solana? This was another statement over here. Rendering on the network on Solana. According to its website, Render Networks is also a leading provider of decentralized GPU-based rendering solutions. We've covered this project both with a dedicated video, but I've also talked about this project as being a key utility token for what's going to happen in the metaverse. And for them to say, hey, listen, we're going to utilize Solana is a big thing. As such, it's a leader in revolutionizing the digital creation process. The project's goal is to create a much more efficient, powerful, and widely scalable rendering network than anyone can use and see before. Urbac also announced Render's network integration with Solana's blockchain. So I think this, again, is another one of those opportunities where Solana can really plug into these jewels of the crown. And you've got projects like Audius, you've got projects like Render, and many others that could be those jewels of the crown if they execute and they perform, and we see this movement. It's like a great football team. All the pieces start to come together, and all of a sudden you have a Super Bowl winner. Those are the kind of things that Solana, I think, is trying to put together, which goes back to the reason that they're on this whole worldwide tour of grabbing up talent. That is going to be the key aspect to be able to splinter into some of these projects and support the ecosystem to handle onboarding of SolPay, Audius for creators and music, and then something like Render, where you're talking about basically rendering all digital assets that are moving into the metaverse. All of that that's a big bite to take, especially with what you see in terms of these projects in Web3 and where Solana plays into this. A couple more stories here. One is Solana's weekend bounce returns, risk returning into a bull trap. This is kind of the bad end of it. Can Solana price fall to $60? And this is what the analyst is saying. I want you to kind of take a look at this section right here. So it's called a head and shoulders. You guys have probably seen this in many of the TA topics. We have Evan on that will often get into this technical pattern, basically when price forms 3 peaks in a row and a common support level called a neckline. As it typically turns out, the pattern's middle peak, called the head, is essentially kind of the trend line that you don't want to fall into. And that's where this pattern sends the prices lower at length equal to maximum distance between the head and the neckline once they decisively break below its neckline. So what you're seeing right here is what he's talking about as being a head and shoulders. If it breaks that line right there, we could see Solana break down here into the $60 price point range. Let me kind of zoom up on that just a little bit so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But the whole issue right here of this analyst is that he's looking at a very solid support line right here at holding it around $88, which is about where Solana is trading right now. If it does fall below that point and we start to see an aggressive move downward, the next real support level, you have 2. One is going to be right around 62, the breakout target. And then this guy has it all the way down to potentially a $34 to $32 support line. This is where it gets really risky for, I think, Solana. I think there's a lot of things, though, that can happen with them. Now, would it be a big thing for it to fall to 32? One of the things that we track on an ongoing basis is sentiment. And one thing that I've been able to do, and we've been able to do this fairly efficiently and accurately, is look at these trends, these macro trends on sentiment, and do they give us downward trend or upward trend analysis? And we've done this with many tokens across the lineup. And the way we do it is with our power index. But I want to show you Bitcoin just to give you an example. So we're tracking Bitcoin here, and you'll notice right here that back in, we're going to go to the day chart. This is back on January 25th. We had a 62, which one of the lowest points of sentiment that we had seen. We had seen the downward trend right here at the end of this red candle that dropped on January 22nd. But you start to see the sentiment climbing out for Bitcoin and then stabilizing right here and then repositioning back downward to where we're at around 72 again. And remember, back here, the reason I'm showing this is because sentiment data will give us enough of a head start on where potential price action is going. Now, let's jump over to the Solana chart and show you the same thing. So right here, I'm going to go all the way back here into November. And if you look at Solana right here on a down candle on November 18th, Solana had been one of its highest rating. Remember, we had an 80 back here during a run-up right here, if you look at where Solana is holding. And that right there is when Solana was holding right at $250. So you can kind of see just the quick run right there since November. Then you had this downslide. Solana drops essentially right down here to its bottom at around 190. It takes a little bit of a run up right here at 234. And again, 77, we showed a downward trend continuous. Now this was a short-lived period of time. Another downward trend occurred, which when we see that, 77 to a 75, we're expecting some downward trend, and it happened. Goes to a 73, also a downward trend, and we continue to take that slide down to a 72. The next time we pulled in, it stabilized right here, actually showed an up for the first time, and just a little bit right here. And this is what is different right here. Look at the amplification score right here, 6817. This is an indicator for us. Whenever we see amplification separating during an uptrend, it tells me that we are in for either sideways action or some downward trends. And that's exactly what's been happening with Solana. It got a little bit of upward traction right here, trading up to around 117, 116, and then boom, fell back down until what we're on right now, which is a couple of red candle days at 71 and an amp of 70. Now, this is the, if you look back, the last time we had a low amp right here, notice right here a 70, downward trend. 73 had a small upward trend, and then boom, it fell out right here at 68, a little bit of sideways, and then downward trend again, but not holding much on amplification. Now let me explain amplification and sentiment. Sentiment is when people are talking about the project, saying they're going to invest in it, have news on why that project's doing great. That's going to generate sentiment scores. Amplification is when things are being done by influencers, key accounts that might not be influencers, but are potentially have a lot of influence on the market. And this could be investment accounts, major project accounts, things of that nature that are on social media. And that is essentially develops what we call faith in the system, or it's like when you see a stock and you've got, a big analyst that's giving it a buy signal. Those are kinds of things that we look at that start to create amplification because it's usually a forward-looking scenario. So when you go back to the chart here, if I look at Solana right now, and I'm reading these past sentiment scores, and if you're looking at our power index, you're going to get these weekly. So for instance, I'm at a 72. I'm back here on January 10th. I get a little bit of a bump at 73, but just too tight. And then I fall to 73, or go to 73, and then I see a big amplification separation. That was reported on our power index, which tells me immediately that we're going to see a little bit of movement and then probably sideways or down. And then, of course, amplification holds right here at 70. So we're still anticipating that Solana is probably going to take a continued downward trend. And if you look at the top line here, let me just kind of draw a little bit of a line here just to give you guys a little bit of a short-term track record. If you look back here of where that high, we'll go right there. And if you take that and just hold that, and let's say we're holding right there, so we're picking up that high and that low, it's definitely on a trend line moving downward. So this is a concern. This is also a potential opportunity because you're looking at buying Solana at $89 where it was trading back in November at 250, 240. We've seen a 160 as a secondary high. These are the kind of things potentially that could be great entry points, especially if you're looking at getting into altcoins for your first time. And a Solana being a very solid project in the sense of continuing its work on growing the ecosystem. The key is handling congestion and being able to get past all that. That's, of course, what we're going to be keeping an eye on very closely here on the show. And of course, as again, we'll drop these sentiment data points to you guys every Monday. We do it over on the Power Index, so you can check them out there. Otherwise, watch the show right here because a lot of times we'll pick out projects like Solana, like this one, and give you some of this data, right here. So it's easy to find. All right, so if you're listening in over on the podcast right now, just tune in over here to the YouTube channel. This is the #1 place where you'll get the charts, you'll get the analysis, the news stories. Many cases are AMAs and even our interviews, our CEO interviews, which really dive in deep. You want to subscribe right here on the YouTube channel. Make sure to like a video, and of course, shout us out there on social media, and you can reach me out there on Twitter @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.